Greetings. My name is Dalibor Petrovic, and I am the founder of the Summit Leadership Alliance. What we thought we should do, instead of supplying you with, written down documents and CVs and resumes, is to give you actually an opportunity to hear directly from members of our alliance. And I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Paul Bellack to this brief conversation, this brief introduction. Paul, first of all, thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you, sir. I'm delighted to be here.
Excellent. So, Paul, what we wanted to do in this segment is to give you an opportunity to tell us a little bit about who you are, your story, your life and career story, perhaps touch on some key lessons you would have learned uh, over your career as a technology leader. Um, Mention a little bit about your leadership and mentorship style, why you joined the alliance, and at the end, of course, we'll call for action for those who are listening to this program. So, with
Of course.
that, if you're okay with that, maybe we should start with just hearing a little bit more about you, your life story, your career story.
Well, thank you. I am now semi-retired after a 45-year career in the IT business. I've been a CIO 6 times. My last and most impactful gig, I suppose, was a 9-year run as global CIO at Magna International. But I've been a CIO over the years at Hudson's Bay Company, at Sobeys, a couple of other smaller Canadian retailers. And also along the way, 45 years is a lot of territory to cover.
Yes.
I've been an IT strategy transformation partner level person at EY, at IBM for more than a few years. And in fact, I also was a partner at a very small retail boutique consultancy that is now part of PwC. So I've certainly made the rounds on both sides of the table. Throughout all of that, I've always been involved with some sort of transformation.
Yeah.
I think I'm just wired to kind of envision a better future, whatever circumstances I was ever involved in, and kind of figure out how to sell that future and ultimately deliver that future. So that's always been sort of the defining characteristics of the work that I've done. But I consider myself very fortunate to have such a long and varied career and have a lot of fun along the way as well.
Yeah.
In terms of sort of the formation of my career, in terms of education, I've kind of taken a non-traditional path to IT management, and I won't sit here claiming that I planned it all. A lot of it was just happenstance and serendipity. I actually trained as an industrial engineer almost 15 years ago, and I'm very much of an engineering mindset.
Yeah.
Then I went on to do an MBA in finance. In fact, the first 7 or 8 years of my career was in finance.
Ah.
At that point in my career, a particular situation emerged in the company that I was working at. One of my peers was running IT for that company, and it was kind of a classic situation. He was a brilliant technologist, but just a really poor IT executive, and his IT org was struggling. He didn't really know how to turn it around. So with my transformation wired brain, I just had a lot of ideas on how to move IT forward. So, in fact, we went together to our mutual boss and pitched an idea where I would run IT and he would be my so-called CTO. Back then, we didn't use terms like CTO, but that's what he was. So the boss took a little bit of a chance on me because I really had no experience in running an IT organization, but it worked out great, and the rest is history.
The rest
So
is
that kind of launched me into IT, and I've kind of described my journey. It's sort of a third in management consulting and two-thirds as a CIO industry practitioner. But I retired voluntarily 2 years ago. I just didn't want to work that hard, to be honest, at this point in
yeah.
my life. Life of a CIO is a lot of hours and a lot of stress. Um, in semi-retirement, my vision was to find a way to add some value to the next generation
Yes.
of IT leaders, somehow leveraging my 45 years of experience. I must have done something right along the way, both as a CIO and as a management consultant. So in the 2 years since retiring, I'm actively addressing the next generation through a couple of programs that I've developed that focus on leadership development and mentoring for both IT professionals aspiring to the CIO role, and quite interestingly enough, sales and consulting professionals in the IT ecosystem aspiring to serve their CIO clients more effectively. Right. So it's
Oh,
kind of
that's great.
two sides of the table, which is really quite a bit of fun. So that seems to have worked out quite well. My programs seem to be going well. I've taken over 250 next generation participants through my programs, with more in the pipe, and that's kind of what's keeping my brain occupied in semi-retirement. And of course, now I'm delighted to have joined your Summit Leadership Alliance. Working with the next generation of IT leaders is exactly what your Summit Leadership Alliance is all about. So
Correct.
I'm very much looking forward to working with the impressive collection of allies that you've managed to assemble, and see if we can add some value back to the IT industry in Canada.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Paul, for that introduction. So you
My
mentioned
pleasure.
a career that spans over 4 decades. Uh, you would have observed and seen the evolution of a role of a technology leader over that time. You, of course, being one 6 times over. Um, I would love to get your thoughts on how did you see that evolution occur? And now in 2025, what do you feel or know would be the most important attributes for a credible, competent, successful tech leader for today and tomorrow?
Right. Well, I think that the evolution of the CIO role has been profound. Right. If I
Yeah.
think back 15, 20 years ago, truly profound. The role used to be about, I don't know, we'll call it managing technology enablement, right?
Yeah.
So keeping the lights on in terms of infrastructure, run the network, run the servers, all that jazz, standing up technology-based capabilities to enable the business fundamentally, stand up the ERP and the payroll system and the data warehouse, et cetera, et cetera. So that was the role. Today, that role really hasn't disappeared. Somebody has to do that. But with the advent of digital transformation, data, analytics, AI, the never ending cybersecurity considerations, the whole democratization of IT out in the business,
Yeah.
the CIO has to worry about all the traditional issues, keep the lights on and enable those, technology enabled business initiatives. But there's such a wider set of technology management issues associated with all the new stuff,
Yeah.
right? So the scope of the CIO role, in my sense, has ballooned,
Yeah.
right? And as a result, the scope, the technical domains that a CIO needs to have his hands or her hands over, right? So as a result, what I see now, in the addition to the CIO role, many companies have added other sort of adjacent C-suite roles, like the chief digital officer, the chief technology officer, the chief information security officer. So lots of chiefs.
Yeah.
Why so many chiefs? My perspective is that a single executive can't possibly manage all that technology in one head. It's just too wide to manage effectively. So, and a CIO being asked to do that and doing all the things that a modern CIO has to do to be an effective and strategic partner to the business, right? So it's that last bit, it's partner to the business, that really forms the essence of the modern CIO, business partner, sitting at the business table, that really drives the skill set of a modern CIO. So it is no longer the smartest tech person in the room. The skill set, in my experience, frankly, has very little to do with technology. You certainly have to have a talent for technology and understand the fundamentals and the buzzwords, and not be snowed by vendors and your own staff. You have to have a sense of technology, surely, but there's another set of skills. I call them the soft skills, that I think are at higher on the list than technology skills. The first would be just executive communication skills,
Yeah.
the ability to convey complex technology oriented topics to many diverse stakeholder groups for their understanding and buy-in. These are typically people who are very smart but don't have domain knowledge in IT,
Yeah.
right? So that's the challenge, right? So skills like influencing those stakeholders, obviously excellence in communication, but in political savviness and collaboration, all of those sort of soft skills that rely largely on human interaction skills, not technology skills, those become essential. I think it's always been important to build and lead teams. That's always been part of the job, but Now we've got sort of a general war for talent, or used to be a war for talent. Who knows what it's going to look like in a couple of years with AI?
Yeah, yeah, true.
But recruiting, retaining, deploying people, motivating people in a workforce that, frankly, is number one, multi-generational.
Hmm.
You've got Generation Z and Boomers in the exact same workforce who have completely different value set on how they value work, how their approach to work. In a multi-technology environment, you've got people who grew up on a mainframe and people who are, fiddling with AI, all in the same workforce. So how do you manage and lead that workforce is a key skill set that I think a CIO has to bring to the table. And in my view, top of the list. And it might seem funny for a technology guy to say this, but I think organizational change management and just general agility, resilience is another important skill set. Just given the pace of change in our environment today, a CIO has to be world class at those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And so, in my mind, technology, it's obviously on the list, but it's certainly not in the top three.
There we go. That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for that. You mentioned that you spent years now, a couple of years after your semi-retirement, focusing on helping mentoring next generation leaders. Obviously, throughout your career, you did the same for your teams. How would you describe your leadership and mentorship style?
Well, from a style perspective, in terms of leadership development and mentoring, just reflecting my last comments, I tend to focus on the soft skills,
Mhm.
right? I think it's again, it's those soft skills that an IT professional aspiring to the CIO role, obviously the CIO, but anybody who wants to sit in that chair, that's the route to accelerating their careers. So again, it's the long list that I've probably mentioned once or twice already: effective communication, influencing others, change advocacy, partnering with the business, political savviness, risk taking. Um, and I guess the challenge that I'm seeing, and certainly that I observed when I was a CIO, the approach that many organizations have for developing those particular skills in those individuals. I mean, it's largely, I guess, what would one would call the apprenticeship model. Watch the boss and learn, right? There's
Yeah.
no real way to acquire those skills. In my experience in Magna, just as I was leaving Magna, it occurred to me that we've got a big gap there. I had 40 or 50, senior managers, directors, even senior directors who were fantastic technically, but didn't have these skills. And
Yes.
in fact, the root of my program was back then. I was kind of on my way out, and I thought, geez, my give back to my team, who, I had a great team. We were, very loyal to each other. Okay, so, well, maybe I can kind of package up some stuff just from my personal archives, and here's my thoughts on change management. Here's my thoughts
That's
on
right.
influence. How to write an IT presentation.
Yes.
Right. Certainly in my years, just the basics of how to, communicate a technical idea to a non-technical audience. So there's some I don't know what one would call some intellectual property associated with that, right? That
Absolutely. Absolutely. The
so
wisdom.
so
Yes.
Right. So there's wisdom there, experiential wisdom, whatever you want to call it. There's a gap there, and my sense was to fill that gap. So that's what I'm trying to do in my leadership and mentoring approach. I also concentrate, certainly spend some time on financial acumen, right? Which seems a little bit weird for an IT professional on the surface, but the reality is we spend a lot of money in IT, right? And the first thing that most people in an organization say when they talk about IT is, boy, those guys spend a lot of money, right? So an IT executive has to have financial skills on how to evaluate, how to justify IT value, how to speak the language of the business in the language that they understand, because at the end of the day, everything boils down to dollars and cents. Certainly in a commercial enterprise, that's what capitalism is all about, right? So you got to understand the financials, and again, frankly, in my experience, the higher you go, the more important finance is over technology,
Yeah.
right? So
Yes.
the executive who can kind of bridge the gap, right, between technology, finance, and package it up through good communication and stakeholder management skills. That's the troika, right? So
That,
I
yes.
stress that. I'm a reader of books. I see just based on your background, I think those are real books.
Those sure are. Yes.
That's not a Zoom background. So
Nope.
I'm a reader of books. So I rely on, a couple of books that I've been fortunate enough to read over the years that I try and factor into my materials. There's a classic book that was written 15 years ago that I have everybody read. It's called Eight Things We Hate About IT. So it was written by a Harvard business professor, literally, I think in 2010. And it's just a little bit, I don't know, it's entertaining to read because it's 15 years old and it still rings true.
Yeah. Yeah.
I read Cotter. You must know John Cotter, the
Of course.
father
Yeah.
of change management, right? So John Cotter wrote his first books in the late 80s and the early 90s, right? These are books that are, I can't do the arithmetic in my head, was that 40 years old, whatever.
Yeah.
You read those books, they're still current today. Nothing,
Yeah.
change is change. Change is generic. And so I rely a lot on Cotter. Um, there's a book I read last year called Digital Mindset, which is a very good book that talks about um, what it means to be a digital company in this age of pervasive digital transformation. So there's certainly a lot of information out there, but I'm a reader of books, and I have a book list that I recommend to my mentees. One of which I make them read, and then we discuss in our course.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's my kind of
That's the style
approach.
and the approach. Yes. Well,
Right,
as you mentioned, what is really important is to create not just theoretical, but practical opportunities for these next generation leaders, but also in-role CIOs to actually learn by doing. And
right,
what you are referring to is exactly what the Summit Leadership Alliance as a concept exists to create, which is to activate our clients' strategy, help them actually deliver their mandates, and embed development of leaders within it, so that as we stay with the client, as we help them shape their objectives and help them deliver those objectives, all of these aspects of learning that you mentioned, from executive presence, communication, leadership of teams, dealing with challenges and issues, financial acumen, all of these become part of the process of that learning, experiential learning, that's actually focused on the objectives they need to deliver regardless.
right.
And to me,
And
that really,
I agreed, and I always try and pepper it, season it with war stories. I've
yeah,
got a kind of handful of war stories, some of which talk about failures. I mean,
yes,
I think I mentioned earlier, I'm a transformation guy. Not all transformations work.
correct.
Many of them fail, and many of them disappoint. You think you're going to get a 20% ROI and you get a 3% ROI. So,
Yes,
okay, you got some benefit, but you don't get the return you're expecting. So it's interesting to kind of think about those in retrospect and what could have I done better, and those become interesting conversations.
yes. Wonderful, wonderful. Um, Thank you for that. Shall we maybe touch a little bit on why are you joining the Summit Leadership Alliance?
Well, I think there's 100% alignment between what the alliance is all about and what I've been doing for a living recently. I want to continue to focus on adding some value to the next generation. It's exactly what you're trying to focus on with the alliance. I think that through the alliance, there's kind of a win-win. I'll certainly have the opportunity to get exposed to things that I probably wouldn't otherwise have. So, new and very interesting methodologies that you're bringing to the table. Uh, Maybe some new clients or some new industries that I'll get to work in. Certainly, exposure to new, interesting, and impactful colleagues. The other allies in the alliance that presumably will make me a better mentor and certainly produce a better outcome for our prospective clients here. But so there's a lot in it for me, to be honest, and it's a win-win. Is I think there's a lot in the alliance, and it's just nice that we seem to be 100% aligned in what we're trying to do here. So I'm very much looking forward to working with you and the allies you've assembled to bring some value back to the IT industry.
Fantastic. As I would call it, leaders helping leaders excel. And that
Indeed.
would work within our alliance amongst ourselves as we learn from each other and improve ourselves, but certainly, of course, working with our clients and helping them excel, bringing all that experience, wisdom, all of these insights, and helping a client become a better, well-rounded professional, and ultimately helping them propel their career forward.
Well, there's certainly a very compelling value proposition there.
Yes.
I don't think there's any debate. So I'm anxious to get going.
As we say, onwards and upwards. So
Indeed.
thank you very much, Paul. This was wonderful. We had about a 15 minutes introduction. I hope that this provides you with a bit of a sense of who Paul is, his background, his thoughts on technology leadership and how he would approach thought partnership with us. If you're interested to learn more, please contact us either through our LinkedIn page, or you can also email us at greetings@thesummitla.com. Thank you very much, and we very much look forward to hearing from you.